Shabbat Shalom. Our parsha this week, Acharei, begins with a brief recounting of the death of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, who died b'karavtam lifnei Adonai, in their drawing near to God. All the commentators are trying to figure out why they died. The problem seems to have been, as Hasidic master Me'orei Naim and others interpret it, that Nadav and Avihu were so enamored with the divine light that they focused entirely on ascending to the higher reaches, forgetting that the whole purpose of going up is to come down in order to bring blessing to the earth. Their job was not the attainment of their own spiritual purity or elevation. Their job was to reach upward so that they could bring blessing to real living people on the ground who needed it. I feel compelled tonight to speak to the young people who are on college campuses right now. I also want to speak to the adults who have young people in their lives who they're worried about. And I want to speak to all of us who are reacting to what we're seeing. I don't know how many people who are sitting in encampments tonight or are supporting them will hear me. But I want you to know, if you're listening, that I believe in your right to protest. And I know how much courage it takes to risk your academic careers, your safety, and a certain kind of respectability. I know that many of you are out there protesting because you cannot tolerate seeing the extreme suffering of Gazans, and you feel you must try to help. I am with you in that feeling. And I know that if I was a student on your campus, a part of me would wish that I could join you in your protests. But I have to admit that some of what is happening in these encampments is frightening me. Not only personally as a Jew, but as someone who cares about what happens to Palestinians and who cares about what happens to Israelis too. And as someone who cares about what happens in the United States. I wonder if tonight I can say something that could reach you, that could help us find some common understanding. You are accomplishing something extraordinary. Those of us who have dedicated our lives to justice, to freedom, to human dignity, dream of building a movement that spreads, that inspires, that captures the attention of the world. Seeing the messages of gratitude on the tents in Gaza, hearing the interviews with Palestinians in which they thank you, you see that you reached them in their living nightmare. You made them feel less alone in the world. You showed them that their lives matter and that you are fighting for them. I see those of you who are Jewish trying to take the highest values of Judaism and put them into action. You know that our central defining narrative is the Exodus, just told at Passover, in which our experience of enslavement has a purpose, and that purpose is explicitly to demonstrate that the God of the universe is on the side of freedom and justice, and that God expects us to translate our experience of degradation into a moral duty to oppose the enslavement of others and to be active voices for liberation. You are desperate to end the occupation of Gaza and the Palestinian people. I am with you. I have been opposing the occupation since the 1990s. You are affronted, nauseated, crushed by the starvation of millions of children, by mothers giving birth on the ground and lacking the calories to nurse their babies, by families losing 100 relatives under bombs and under rubble, by thousands of wounded children undergoing amputations without anesthesia. If you are Jewish, you are ashamed to have anything to do with this Israeli government that is numb, indifferent, hate-soaked, and perpetrating these crimes. The idea that this is done in your name is intolerable to you, and you are out there because you are trying to use your body and your voice and every bit of privilege you have to stop it. And not just to stop it. You want freedom for the Palestinian people. You want them to have their own country with their own government, with no one hurting them and no one controlling them. I want that too. But is your message helping them? Think about what Palestinians actually need right now. You have the world's attention. Can you use your platform to help the people living in Gaza? Many voices in and around your encampments have been advocating for the death of Zionists, or have been praising Hamas, or have been calling for October 7th to happen again and again, or have been calling for intifada and praising martyrs, or have been fantasizing about burning Tel Aviv to the ground. I know that there are forces trying to co-opt what you are doing. I know that you can't control everything that gets said in and around your protest. I imagine that many of you are uncomfortable or even ashamed to be associated with these voices. I know that most of you understand that Hamas is a terrible, dangerous force that is actively victimizing the Palestinian people right now as much as it seeks to murder Jews. I know you do not celebrate murder. I know that for many of you, your vision for freedom is for all people. Do not forget that you yourself have a voice. You have social media, you have poster boards, you can make statements, you can make sign-on letters, you can contact the press, you can make clear what you do and do not stand for. And the media will always look for the most outrageous messages, so if you wish to dissent from these violent, maximalist, eliminationist voices, you must do so loudly, clearly, unequivocally. If you are trying to do this now, we cannot hear you. Be louder. Be clearer. Keep trying. This matters immensely. You have a tremendous opportunity to change the world right now, but the opportunity is being missed. The hate in your encampments is making them easy to dismiss. I understand that it might feel impossible to disagree. Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, a Palestinian leader in Los Angeles who visited the UCLA encampment, posted on social media, "There was no room or space for bringing different views about the protests or the issue, as everybody was either on the same page or there was almost complete conformity with regard to the opinions that the protesters espoused about Zionism, Israel, Gaza, etc. The slogans, the goals, and the ethos are based on maximalist, zero-sum aspirations that will never achieve anything for the Palestinian cause. It was clear that a small group of students and organizations developed the platform, and subsequently the masses are being herded into following it seemingly mindlessly and without a deep understanding of Gaza or Hamas or Israel or foreign policy and all the relevant issues." Now, this may not describe the conditions where you are if you are hearing me. If you have the ability to shape what is happening where you are, the best thing you could do is to create a focused message on what Palestinians actually need right now. Ceasefire, new Palestinian leadership, a Palestinian state, the release of hostages in exchange for prisoners, an end to the humanitarian crisis, an end to the war, international commitment to rebuild Gaza. Use your platform to say this, and to denounce every message of hate, every message of violence, every message that seeks the elimination of anyone. Don't enable your hard work to be dismissed because of hateful voices. Be strategic. Be humane. When something is harmful, don't let it go by unaddressed. Do what will actually help the Palestinian people. Use the high platform you've attained to bring blessing to the world. And this is perhaps the most important thing I can say to you. There is literally nothing worse you could do for the Palestinian people than to allow your protests to affect the US elections in November. It is not all the same, all the outcomes of this election for the Palestinian people. One outcome would be terrible for the Palestinian people. Please be strategic. We're living in a time when our society is flirting with authoritarianism, when freedom of expression and the right to protest may not be here that much longer. Civil disobedience is an important form of expression by which we risk arrest to demonstrate our strongly held beliefs, bring attention to our cause, and inspire others to take similar courageous action. Some of you know I have been arrested 8 times for civil disobedience. Arrests are part of the deal. They're even part of the strategy. The original Columbia University arrests galvanized the nation. I am not troubled by the police being called in and arresting people who are committing civil disobedience. That's what happens. However, police brutality is unacceptable. In some places, the police have been exemplary. But we know we have a police brutality problem in this country. And there's no reason for police to use violence against these protesters unless the protesters are violent first. And therefore, I urge you, if you can hear me, if you are participating in an encampment, do not engage in violence or property destruction, and do not resist arrest. Learn how to effectively cooperate with the police when they come to arrest you, because if your purpose is freedom for the Palestinian people, there's no reason to fight with your local police. Your point is made through your arrest. When your protests become violent or lawless, destructive or chaotic, they become fodder for a right-wing law and order agenda. But when you are orderly and disciplined and nonviolent in your protests, every one of us who stands for democracy must stand for your right to express yourselves freely, including when you say things we disagree with, including if we find what you are saying offensive, even abhorrent. Think too, if you can hear me, about whether you want to undermine your university as an institution. The universities you are occupying are crucial pillars of our democracy. Charged as they are with promoting freedom of thought and the exchange of ideas, protest away. Feel free to oppose university policy, but don't try to harm or take down the university itself unless you want to ally with right-wing forces who oppose universities as liberal bastions and are trying to take them down. As you know well, it is challenging to create an environment where freedom of expression is balanced with human dignity. Because in order for everyone to share equally in the freedom of expression, hate speech and language that debases or intimidates others has to be curbed. For example, you know that racist or transphobic speech actually reduces total freedom of expression because it crowds out the space. It silences its targets. DEI work has been instrumental in teaching our country this important lesson. The very next thing for DEI to take on is anti-Semitic speech. Anti-Semitism is confusing, and it is complicated, and none of us understands it well enough. It is often invisible to non-Jews, and it is internalized in all Jews, so much so that many times it is undetected, unnamed, doubted, written off, misunderstood. There was a time when this was true for every form of bias we now better understand: racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. Invisible to those who aren't targeted, internalized by those who are. One of the confusing things about anti-Semitism is that a person can have white skin privilege and class privilege and still be targeted by anti-Semitism. And before you say, well, then anti-Semitism doesn't matter much because its targets have so much power, well, then think about whether you'd say that. Transphobia doesn't matter because some transgender people are white and wealthy. It does matter. And beware. Anti-Semitism serves the function of distracting, dividing, and undermining movements for justice and freedom. This will happen to every movement you care about until you understand it. When Jews at Columbia, who were minding their own business, walking down the street, faced shouts like, "Die, Jew," "Kill yourself," "Die, Nazi bitches," "We are all Hamas," this was a gift to the right wing, who pretend that they are the only champions of Jews and of Israel, and who use anti-Semitism on the left to defeat liberals. That anti-Semitism was extreme and obvious, and much of it was shouted by people who are not affiliated with the university, but in many more subtle ways. Your movement is suffused with anti-Semitism, just like our whole world is suffused with anti-Semitism, even if it is not obvious to you, even if you cannot see it. And I am telling you, unless you actively and clearly work against it, it will destroy what you are building. If you are a college student who is Jewish and who's offended by these protests, I hear you and I see you enduring hateful, anti-Semitic, violent shouts and chants day after day would make anyone very fearful and angry. You want to and you should stand up for Israel, for our family and our friends who are traumatized from October 7th, who've endured extreme sexual violence that the world bizarrely denies, who are grieving, who have held their breaths for more than 6 months while the hostages languish and are abused in tunnels, who are displaced within Israel as they hide and take shelter from Hezbollah rockets. Some of you are in truly hostile environments on your campuses, and you do not deserve that. It must stop. But the worst thing you could do for the Jewish people is allow the pro-Palestinian movement to radicalize you to the right, to pull you away from your own values. I know that the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic hate that is being hurled at Jews is making us feel that the whole world is against us and that there's no one we can trust to stand with us. But the right wing are not our friends. And surely you must see that the Palestinian people, the people of Gaza, need relief and need freedom. The violence that took place by right-wing Jewish counter-protesters with Zionist flags at UCLA was disgraceful. Racism, ethno-nationalism, Jewish supremacism will only undermine the cause of Israel and the cause of the Jewish people. And it will hurt the Jewish people if you try to shut down the voices you don't agree with. Our hope and our future remain in liberal democracy, and nothing short of democracy is at stake right now. The right to protest, the right to free speech, the universities, movements for equality and justice are what have made us safe as Jews in America. Today, anti-Semitism must be called out and taken on in all of these arenas. We need friends who will do that for us and with us. And I know it's terrifying to look around and wonder if they are out there. We must find them, embolden them, and call them to their higher purpose. There is no other path for our people in this country. The alternative, the authoritarian right, is not safe or life-affirming for us or for anyone. And now I want to speak to the adults with college-age kids. I've spoken with several parents who are really worried that their kids are participating in something harmful to the Jewish people. Some of you expressed to me that you feel torn between your relatives who are far to your right and your kids who are far to your left. What I see among our youth is that they grew up with a Judaism that taught them to love the stranger, that taught them to stand with the oppressed, that taught them to fight for freedom and to find the courage to use their voices for justice. We should be proud of that. They're in an environment where the post-colonial analysis is everywhere. And it goes like this. If only the Jews would leave. If only Israel would end. If only Zionism would end. The Palestinian people could be free. Their land was stolen. And it was during the time of British colonialism when Jews from Europe were allowed to settle in Palestine. This is the obvious source of the problem. And if we could just remove the problem, i.e. the Jews, then the people, i.e. the Palestinians, would be free. Even as there is anti-Semitism in the language I just used, there is also truth to this post-colonial analysis. But it's just not the whole truth. Because we know that the Jews who came to settle in Palestine in the late 19th century and the 20th century were fleeing systemic anti-Semitic violence. And they didn't choose Palestine as their refuge randomly. They were going home. Our people were indigenous in Palestine when the Roman Empire came and named it Palestine and then expelled us. And literally every single day since then, we have been praying to go home. What made us finally go home was a centuries-long frenzy of anti-Semitic murder that culminated in actual genocide. And we know that Zionism is the idea that the Jewish people, like the Palestinian people and every other people on earth, deserve to be safe and free. Colonists like the British and Dutch in South Africa or the French in Algeria had a different home to return to. Decolonization was possible because they had another land. Not so with the Jewish people of Israel, whose ancient home is Israel, and whose exiled grandparents came from Iraq and Iran and Yemen and Poland and Russia and places where they narrowly escaped slaughter. For the Jews of Israel, there is no other land but Israel. Perhaps some of you can say some of that to your kids. Perhaps they will listen and perhaps they will not. But you can say this: it is terrible, it is shameful that the founding of the state of Israel included the dispossession, in many cases the violent dispossession, of the Palestinian people from their land. It is a sin that we, the Jewish people, must repent for. Like white Americans must repent for the dispossession and murder of Native Americans at a much greater scale. But the fact remains that 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians live on the land today. And like in the United States, no one in Israel-Palestine is going anywhere. So there is limited utility in debating the merits of Zionism as a theory, or wishing you could go back 80 years and change what happened. 7 million Jews live there now and have nowhere else to go. 7 million Palestinians live there now and have nowhere else to go. Our challenge right now is to uphold and defend the humanity of both peoples. What I see is a lot of our kids in incredibly challenging environments, bravely grappling with that complexity and trying to hold on to nuance. One student said to me, and this is a paraphrase, "I sympathize with the protesters. I want this war to end. The Palestinian people deserve a state. I want to join the protest, but I can't, because some of them are saying they're pro-Hamas, and they're calling for violence against Israelis and against Jews. My friends who are in the protest don't agree with those messages. They just want a ceasefire, but meanwhile, they're being completely harassed by pro-Israel protesters who are being totally inappropriate, aggressive, and in their face. And the only thing that's actually made me feel unsafe this entire time is the police, who were extremely violent. It is such a mess, and I feel like there's nowhere I can go. There's no home for me." I said to that college student, and I say to any young person who's listening, CBE is a home for you. You who are grappling hard with all the complexity, you who are outraged by this war, you who are defensive of Israel and the Jewish people, you who long desperately for Palestinian freedom, you who are seeking nuance, you who are protesting and you who are not protesting, you who have difficult conversations with compassion, you who want to be in a place that can tolerate difference of perspective and disagreement and still be a community. You have a home. You have a place. You are not alone. And what I want to say to the adults who love you is that it is our job to hold open that home, to hold open the space and time for your kids to figure this out while we're all trying to figure it out. It's our job not to overreact. It's our job to recognize that college students are going to try on ideologies and ideas, are going to be passionate. I was, still am, was more then, weren't you? We're in a massive moral crisis. Good for them for paying attention. Good for them for getting involved. Good for them for trying to figure out what they can do to make a difference. And this is good instruction for the rest of us, whether we have college kids or not, to resist overreaction. Last week, Rabbi Green gave a beautiful sermon in which he talked about the way that reaction escalates conflict and division. Our job is to resist polarization. Polarization is candy for the right. Remember that we learned after the last election that the Russians tried to influence the outcome by stoking division and polarization. Our government this time has expressed concern that the Chinese might be trying to influence our elections this year as well. I have no idea if that's happening. I'm not claiming it is. But think about who benefits from our divisions and whether you want to help them. And if you do not want to help them, what do you want to do differently, given that liberal democracy is on the line? I'll close with the words of a Columbia student who wrote to me, and she's actually here tonight. I was wanting to reach out to you in hopes that you might have some thoughts as to things I can do and ways to get involved to fulfill my role of making the world a slightly better place in these incredibly dark and scary times. One thing I've been doing is attempting to have conversations with peers and friends on both extreme sides of the issue. I uncomfortably have friends who have started wearing keffiyeh and sleeping at the encampment. And I also have friends who are staunchly pro-Israel. Because of this, I've found that my stance, I think it's simply a humanitarian stance, has allowed my friends to let their guard down and share their opinions with me, which has allowed me to share mine with them and possibly give them some insight as to what people on the other side might be feeling and thinking. I've engaged in some conversations that have lasted upwards of 3 hours, and I believe that this slowly starts to bridge the divide between the two sides that I currently find to be incredibly dehumanizing and scary. I wrote to this student that she had answered her own question, that she was doing the very thing that is making the world a better place in these incredibly dark and scary times. She is bringing blessing into the world. Tomorrow night, I am flying to Israel. I'll be there for a week with Trua, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, and with J Street. We'll be visiting the kibbutzim and the Gaza envelope and the Nova Festival site and speaking with survivors. We'll be meeting with hostage families. We'll be meeting with Knesset members and pollsters and democracy activists and coexistence activists in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. We will be going to Ramallah to meet with Palestinian leaders and political analysts and pollsters. We will be grappling with the immense pain and complexity and trying to discern a path toward freedom and safety for both peoples. Students, adults, protesters, counter-protesters, non-protesters, please remember that when it comes to Israel-Palestine, our true purpose is not to get lost in lofty debates over abstract ideals, but to bring the actual blessing of our work and effort, our voice and our courage to real human beings who are trapped together in a small piece of land and need safety and need freedom and need peace. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.